Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. That little video introduction. Today I'm using music also from Hikosaemon
Oh, wow.
via SoundCloud. So you have to listen to that. That was your chill Hana something.
Hanabeat.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah,
Really nice.
that's, I don't
So
know why, but that one's really popular. It got lots of downloads, which
really nice. And that's
that was
that's
nice.
one of the themes I think of our talk today is how you're very good at collaborating and giving people advice and doing things like Creative Commons and sharing your music. So I wanted to make sure that I used it. And that was nice. Nice introduction.
Thank you for using it. And for anyone else, if you want free music to put on your videos or you put in your video games or do whatever, it's I put it there under licenses that anyone's free to use it, and I get a kick out of finding out that people do. So yeah, definitely check that stuff out, and thank you for using it.
So I'm putting up your SoundCloud page right now. Why don't we start with a little introduction of yourself? So basically, people can find you on YouTube is your main thing, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Actually, probably for engagement, Twitter lately, I seem to have more active followers. But yeah, basically YouTube and Twitter. I'm on all platforms, and everything is the same. It's twitter.com/Hikosaemon with an S. Japanese always say that your name should have a Z, not an S. You're spelling your name wrong.
Is that right?
Yeah, and normally like the historic name, the samurai name is with a Z, but when I applied for the channel name on YouTube, it was taken, so I just changed it to an S. And yeah, the result was when I did videos in Japanese, half the comments were, "You spelled your own name wrong." I'm like, I know, um,
And
but
I
that's what makes
I
it unique.
really like your origin story. So when you were, have I got it
With
right?
Alicia,
When
yeah,
you
on my
were
native creative.
oh, I heard it somewhere else too. I think Japan Times also had one. So you were 13 working in a Japanese souvenir shop in Auckland, New Zealand, and
I was
that's how you learned Japanese and got interested in coming to Japan. And then I think non-native creative, you were talking about being a DJ and getting interested in Japan that way.
That was
And
another thing.
yeah,
Yeah, no, it was a school subject in New Zealand, so I took it as a school subject from 13. I was terrible at it, and then when I was 19, I was at risk of failing at university for Japanese, so I, in desperation, went and got a job at a souvenir shop, and I worked there for about 4 years, and I moved in with Japanese people in like a shared student apartment. So I was basically living in a self-created Japan, where outside of my law school classes, my world at home and my part-time job was all Japanese, and that's how I got my speaking up. And yeah, all sorts of I was indeed did bits of DJing, did bits of watching. Did I like to joke that I learned Japanese at karaoke in New Zealand, watching dramas. I did all that stuff. So yeah,
that's great. And that was something really interesting to me because when I took students to New York, they had a Japanese convenience store. And all the staff were Japanese. Everybody spoke Japanese in there. All the stuff was like a normal convenience store. And so when I heard this story about you, I thought, I can totally imagine that in
yeah.
Auckland. Yeah.
It's funny. It was a souvenir shop for Japanese people, but there always had to be one New Zealander on every shift in case a lost New Zealander accidentally came into the shop. So I was a bit like a bouncer. But yes, of course, we were looking after Japanese people, and all the other staff were Japanese. So that was great for me. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's a good way in Auckland to be immersed in the Japanese language. How a nice chance there.
Yeah. No, that's what I did. I set myself up really fully immersed before I came. I had the plan was from high school that I wanted to go to Japan. So everything was just little baby steps towards that. And yeah, when I realized I was going off track at university, the job and making Japanese friends, and I set up my own little immersed Japanese world in New Zealand. And this was all before. This is when internet was sort of dial up and couldn't really replace everything yet. So yeah, I put a lot of work into that. That paid off. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, do you remember the noise of the internet? That horrible
Oh, of course.
high-pitched noise? Yeah, the
Yeah.
dial-up. I'm on screen right now. I'm showing your Tokyo Tonight
Yeah.
screenshots. So that's your latest venture. How long you been doing that?
Wow. So
A
I
while.
guess quite a while, years, probably 5 or 6 years. I'd
Oh,
guess I've
wow.
been on YouTube for embarrassingly long, like 13 years. For a long time, I did a bunch of different things, and I did a weekly show with Give Me a Break Man, Victor, for a long time called Two and a Half Oyajis, which was a lot of fun. But in the end, I realized that I just wanted to be able to, on my own time, talk about the random stuff that I enjoy. And I found that enjoyable and easier to do when I had a son. Having kids changes things. So yeah, I've just stuck with pretty much just as a weekly routine, Tokyo Tonight now for years and years. And it's become like a time capsule. Like when people are talking about Abe resigning this week, and I was looking for, hey, a few years ago, weren't there people talking about Abe being, some people thought he was going to be this way and he turned out to be this way. And let me Google what I think that is. And I found one of my own videos from 2014 talking about the same thing. So it's become like a self-referencing time capsule. But I've been doing that for a long time.
That's wild. And when I was first starting the series, I interviewed Baye. And so I listened and watched your video interview with Baye, and that was 8 years ago. So I mean,
Wow.
you've been really doing a lot for a long time. I loved his book, and I'm just finishing reading right now, and especially now, reading it now in the shadow of Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on, it seems even more powerful. So really, really impressive.
Wait, can I ask which one? Is that the Hi, My Name is Loco?
I'm a racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That book is so good. I mean, I read that book. You saw the video. I was crying on the toilet reading the book. It was embarrassing. It was like, that's like, to me, that should be made into a movie, like, good. And he's such an amazing writer.
He is.
That was actually one of the best things. I still happily say, if someone's published a book, I'll read it, and some of them are good, and some of them they didn't hire an editor and they didn't spell check, and but good on you for writing a book. But Baye, that's like one of the best things I've ever read. I still say it, so yes, that was an absolute pleasure. He's a great guy.
And for me, it was really interesting because I just reread Banana Yoshimoto's Kitchen, and her book it had so many parallels for me in terms of finding out about your own like discrimination that you have, against other people, or things that you have to work out about yourself. Yeah, I could definitely see it being made into a movie. It was really good.
Yeah.
To switch gears a little bit, you said that you came to Japan because of a work or research or interest in sustainability. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is kind of like, as you know, I do lots of things, and it's kind of funny. This is one of the things I've never actually had a real thing to touch on. But so when I was in New Zealand, I did a law degree. I did a politics and law degree. As people who can't make up their minds when they're 18-year-old high school grads sort of just sign up for whatever sounds interesting. And when I got into it, I sort of realized, well, the last thing I want to be, I don't want to be a corporate lawyer. That sounds boring. So I kind of thought, in the mid-1990s, what do I think is going to be big in 2020? And I thought, well, two things. Tech is going to be big. This internet thing looks like it could catch on. And the environment. At that time, we just had the Kyoto Protocol, and that was being negotiated at the time that I was signing up. And I was thinking, this climate change thing, this could be a thing. And if I'm thinking ahead 20 years, where I want to invest my skills, what are some rare skills that would be good to invest in that are going to boost your value and let you do interesting work? And for me, the two were tech and the environment. And I don't think I was wrong. The world's gone off the rails a little bit. I think in terms of climate change, I think we got a little bit fatigued and then lost some governmental, some macro motivation that was there in the 90s. But it doesn't change, of course, the seriousness of the issue. And the compelling need as much as COVID to deal with it. And in Japan, like every other country, everyone was looking really desperately around the time that I was coming into the job market at ways that they could figure out how to meet these goals on carbon emissions and whatnot. So yeah, I focused on both of those things. I focused on green politics, international environmental law, which at that time, if you take those subjects now, there's a lot of fleshed out detail. It's very admin. It's very, big user manual stuff. In those days, it was all theoretical law. It was what would the laws be, which was a lot more sort of abstract and fun. And I also found the green political thought was something else that I did, not as a hippie per se, although I'm from New Zealand. New Zealand's the highest rate of Greenpeace participation in the world. And I did have a mini crystal bearing piano teacher, and there were some pretty hardcore Greenpeace genuine hippies there, so I kind of know what that's like, and I did not identify with that, but I was thinking, I think this could be a thing. So I really invested in those. My first job in Japan was actually as an IT consultant, and after doing that for 3 years, I burned all of my IT programming books. I still actually like IT, but I realized I didn't want to be a system engineer for the rest of my life. And an opportunity came up at a think tank that basically does environmental policy consulting for the Ministry of Environment and at that time the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. And the guy said he's going away, and was I interested? And I went and said, dude, I specialized my whole degree in talking about this stuff, and it was cool. What that job, it was my second job in Japan, but what it involved, it was a complete departure from my first job, but it was really the Japanese government, for different aspects of environmental policy, whenever Japan makes laws, I think we have this idea from Western countries that when countries make laws, voters say what's important to them, and the politicians get round and they say, well, if you want windmills, we'll have 100% renewable electricity, all powered by windmills by next year. And they make these promises without really understanding what's involved, but it all seems like a good idea, and then they disappoint people. Japan is obviously, as you've probably picked up, is very different to that. In Japan, it's kind of funny how you can have elections with almost no policies at all ever being discussed, which on the one hand doesn't make it feel very democratic, but on the other hand, it means you don't have kind of loony policies getting tossed around. And what you have behind that is you have a very large, very professional and sort of tenured bureaucracy that treats it like academic professors. They've all sort of got this sort of tenure, and they spend a lot of time, when you can convince them to take the issue seriously, they'll spend a lot of time, researching and trying to figure out what the best policy is. And they'll do it very quietly, partly because they don't want it to be politicized. They don't want sensitive subjects to be sort of kicked around or left to the whims of TV hosts. They want to be allowed to do it. And what they do when they want to create laws is, you'll have these bureaucrats who are subject matter experts who will connect with certain university professors and master's students and teams to do research, and they'll connect with a couple of think tanks that are generally embedded within a number of the large conglomerates. There'll be the Mitsubishi one, there'll be the Daiwa one, there'll be whatever. And my job was in one of these think tanks that was basically looped in on nearly all of the policy work from the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. And it was specifically, they'll take all of the different aspects of renewable energy law promotion, and they'll dole them out in little parcels. So, for example, one of the first jobs I had to do was they were doing comparative law. They were looking at how Texas and California and Denmark and other countries that were seen as being progressive and having successful renewable energy policies. How did those work? What were the problems that they found? Is this a good system for Japan to emulate or not, or what would have to be adjusted? And so, yeah, my job was to go and spend mostly online research and connecting with environmental research companies and policy companies from those places. But yeah, it was really cool. I was putting together the research papers that were getting aggregated and sent to these committees that were actually drafting the regulations and the laws for this sort of stuff in Japan.
That's really interesting. I noticed I was doing a lot of research on renewable energy, but also sustainable tourism, and about 10 years ago for my master's. And all of my research for sustainable tourism was in New Zealand. Yeah. So like New Zealand, coming from New Zealand, you have a great, I think, background and perspective in how sustainability can work in business and government is my impression. Is that accurate?
By training, I think by nature and by training, I'm kind of self-critical and a bit cynical about it. I think it's wonderful that New Zealand, I think we do great things, and I'm very proud to see New Zealand be representative on all this sort of stuff. And it's kind of our tourism brand that we're the greenest country in the world. At the same time, we're green because we chopped down all the trees and planted grass. And there's a lot of rivers that you can't swim in because of all the nitrate pollution from all the agricultural, runoff and stuff like that. And essentially and it's a funny thing as well. Japan has more native forest than New Zealand does.
But nobody uses it. Whenever I talk to people rebuilding houses or doing remodels, and for us as well, the builders really wanted to import wood from New Zealand, and we said we really want to use Japanese wood, please, or getting forest certified wood, like Ian Davey was talking about with his rebuild. It was really hard to get forest certified wood, so they wanted to import from Canada, New Zealand, Indonesia.
Indonesia and places like that are the big places that they import from. So that's right. And these are all the paradoxes, right? On the one hand, Japan has this wonderful, untouched forest accessible and people sort of protect it. But on the other hand, they protect it at the expense of rainforests in Indonesia.
That was interesting. I mean, just about the
Yep.
forest and the wood. That Japanese wood has never been like Brian Ashcraft last week was
Yes,
saying that Japanese wood
the
has
casts,
never,
the
yeah,
oak,
never
that was
been
so cool.
good for the cast.
Acknowledge.
But
Yeah,
now it's their marketing differentiation that it's sought after
yeah.
because it's never been used before. So hopefully they'll use more local forests and we're thinking more about renewable energy in a different way. So, like, MyMizu is collaborating with Shizen Denki, and
Mm.
you can get clean, renewable energy anywhere in Japan, even if you don't have solar, right? So there is more out of the box type of thinking, creating demand for renewables, that kind of
Oh,
thing.
absolutely. Yeah, and it suits. There are big engineering problems, but they really suit the shokunin, the artisan sort of mentality of the how many electrical engineers are there in Japan, and Japanese people, I think, do care about. It's part of the culture. Like I said, Japan is lucky partly because they import from Indonesia that they do preserve forests, and people do think about these things. And yeah, and it's always wonderful here how the innovation that comes out of Japan, in spite of the image that Japan is a country where people are trained rote learning in schools and creativity is beaten out of people in a way, well, which is true to an extent. But I'm sure you've met so many wonderfully creative people in Japan, and there is kind of I have architect friends who talk about is that suppression of creativity in a way that kind of creates this extreme. If you can fight through it, it's the super creative people that sort of burst out of it and they come up with great stuff, and I never get tired of that. And certainly in the both on the engineering and in the all sorts of other fronts as well, you see that sort of thing. The sustainability thing, by the way, as well, is something I wanted to bring up when I realized I'd be talking to you. I was thinking, well, so many cool things to talk about. For me, the green politics, the history of green politics, and is like because I was really obsessed with like how should we be even thinking about sustainability? And Japan is a really, really interesting reference point on this. So it's sort of like, sorry, I'm changing the subject completely on
No,
my own,
you're
but
fine. You're
if you'll
fine.
indulge me. Um, so the thing, as an objective, non-hippie, but person really interested in environmental politics and the history of sort of, and when I say politics, I mean is like an economic system. As someone, building sustainability into a society-wide, like how do you get people to actually take climate change seriously again and not be the frog boiling in the pot like we have right now? And it's this problem with a lot of ideologies is how do you get people to buy into it? Do you force them to do it like an authoritarian thing? Or a lot of hippies like to, a lot of environmentally minded people think, well, if you just explain it to them and they'll get it, and then everybody will buy into it. But it doesn't
No.
quite, and unfortunately, it doesn't work like as smoothly as that. But so the fundamental underpinning of most environmental thought anywhere in the world is Malthusianism, which is a bit of a dirty word, and it's been used in a lot of negative. You familiar? It's the disaster of the commons. It's an idea. I think he came from UK, like in the 18th century, and this is where you had in the Britain when you had the Industrial Revolution happening and this overpopulation happening and people living longer because of medicine improving. What was happening was families were having like 10 kids, but only the eldest was getting the land. Pollution was starting to, and there were food shortages. There were basically too many people, and it became evident. He sort of realized, he put the math together. If you have a society that's consuming more and more per person, and you have people that are increasing at an increasing number and a finite amount of land and resources, which at that time you could say Britain was as an island country, it's just math that all the escalating lines will lead ultimately to a crash. That
But
if you,
but but
yeah,
but if we change our wasteful ways as westernized countries, as super wasters like
mm,
Japan and America and other Western countries, and we decrease our meat consumption, we decrease our fossil fuel use, and then the argument that people need to stop having more children, there is enough
oh
resources, there is enough food for everybody around the world if we change our ways. And that's the problem. People are very
yeah.
reluctant to change, right?
Absolutely. And this is where, so in the Western context from Britain, and of course, Britain kind of cheated. They got around it by sending people to America and Australia and New Zealand and colonizing. And, they found ways to keep going outwards. And when bad people picked it up, yes, they focused on there are two parts to it. There's per capita economic consumption, or consumption, just full stop. And there's people. And, some people say, some bad people have focused on the people part of it and said, well, only certain people should be around, or but that's one part of it. But the other part, the economic part, there are people who the limits to growth, was like when the United Nations was founded, and they said, if we're going to run out of fuel by 1980. But there were a lot of people in the post-war period who were really focused on resources being constrained and figuring out how to sustainably use, to in replaceable levels, exactly what you're talking about, focusing on the sustainability of use of resources. There is a really good precedent in Japan of that. Not an ideal, no example is ever perfect, but it's funny. Britain and Japan were in very much the same situation at the same time. When Malthus was writing about how the world was going to end from too many people consuming too much. And Japan had the same thing. It had overpopulation. But the difference between Japan and UK was that Japan had isolated itself. It deliberately was not going and colonizing other countries or sending people out. It was locked into its own sort of island, and it had the same thing. It had too many people. And one of the books, that I read when I was learning about Japan before I came here, that opened up my eyes, was there's a former bureaucrat from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry called Taichi Sakaya. And he was writing about his views on what's wrong with how Japan is run, with how the bureaucracy is run, and why are things different in Japan to America and Europe, and why do they do things differently. And he used an example from the Shogunate period about how they dealt with this problem about sustainability. And how it permeates society today. They were so successful at it. And it's really fascinating, and you don't hear people talk about it very much, but for me, it's one of the keys to understanding so much about Japan. It's about Baigan Ishida philosophy. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but to me, it's one of the light switches that came on. The situation you had in Japan was people were consuming way too much. They were the economy, the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate government. Tokyo was a massive city, one of the biggest cities in the world. Japan was technologically fairly well advanced, and people were living longer and so on. But there was this problem with the economy, that it was going through these boom bust cycles. There were two things that were happening. One, the economy would boom, like there'd be like tulip bubbles every year. There'd be pot bubbles where everyone would suddenly overproduce pots, and then there would be like too much stuff, and then the price would collapse. So there were these boom bust economic cycles happening like every 5 years. And of course Japan, because if there's an El Nino, all the crops fail, and half the population would starve in a famine every 10 years. And there was a problem for the government trying to figure out, how do we suppress this kind of these extreme economic up and downs? How can we get them to flatten out and just not chop down all the trees at once? And the philosophy that they borrowed, or one of the philosophies that they borrowed for this, which translates to a sustainability philosophy, is Ishida Baigan was a Buddhist philosopher. It was like, had one of these little Confucian philosophy schools. And it became really popular within the bureaucracy to praise the idea that a good merchant, a good shopkeeper, is a person who, rather than being the jumble store, rather than being the Don Quixote full of stuff, wall to wall, an austere shop, if you're selling pots, rather than having, pots, floor to roof and, at the cheapest prices, sell good pots. Spend a lot of time making the best pot you could possibly make, even if it doesn't need to be the best pot. And, have an austere, clean shop, make sure that you sweep the street in front of it, that you take care to do everything really, really well, and hold that person up as an example of what a good, that's good behavior. And this idea of instilling this artisan mentality of taking pride in doing everything well and doing a few things really well. So it was a frugality. It wasn't expressed in environmental terms. It was a frugality mentality, but it was actually picked up by the government to sort of consider. Now we just turn on interest rates. We'd increase interest rates to suppress, an economy being too hot.
But that concept of making higher quality things that you can use longer, you reuse the source material. These are all key fundamental aspects of any sustainability model right now. We just
Without
need to look back, like to the Edo Jidai, or that era.
Yeah. And this was it. So that they would incentivize and praise, and the government, the whole bureaucracy sort of realized, oh, okay, we need to promote this kind of behavior because, otherwise the economy is going to keep having this roller coaster ride thing. So without having central banking or anything like that, the way that they found to cool the economy and manage in a really resource limited, small, narrow country that was like the world today in a way, they sort of found that the government wholesale adopted this philosophy, and it so permeated, it was so successful. It's in the culture today. You can see it today. And he gave a great example, like with the pots. After the war, when America started trying to import pots into Japan with the copper bottoms, in Japan, the American ones were mass produced out of factories, and the copper bottoms, they were always kind of splotched, and it was just a superficial aspect of the process that they didn't look very nice. But Japanese pots were always polished and perfectly like even colored. And apparently the American ones, even though they were cheaper and they were mass produced, no one would buy them. And this was where Americans and people coming into Japan would always struggle, because Japanese consumers were so used to the philosophy of a frugal, perfectionist sort of artisan, maker of everything, and they didn't want to buy stuff that was cheaper. We know, of course, how much Japan has changed, and that's not always the case, and Don Quixote is a thing. But there was this philosophy in Japan. So on the one hand, there is this great way of thinking that worked really well for hundreds of years in Japan. On the other hand, of course, the Tokugawa Shogunate is not really the ideal political system to recommend for a country. It was pretty coercive.
And then there were, like you said, there were ups and downs too. Like, isn't it Back to the Future, that wonderful scene where he goes back and then they're saying Japanese stuff? No way. I'm not going to use that. It's junk. And he's like, what do you mean? Japanese stuff is great. So it's that time period when after the war, it was the made in China. Now made in China is actually increasing in quality as well. So it's, it did go up and down as well.
Yeah. But, I mean, that being one thing I found really interesting just culturally, and that resonated, and it's kind of like where you look at everything on a timeline in the West of how people have looked at sustainability and the rocky ride it's had and the swings and forths, and yet in Japan, in a way, they were dealing with these problems we're dealing with now, and even found out reasonably good solutions for it, hundreds of years ago, which are still, you can see in sort of values of people today.
Yeah. And I think if you were working in the industry about 10 years ago, there was a lot of positive momentum 10 years ago. The Kyoto Protocol, there was an idea that we were going to make a clean future economy. And then for the last 10 years, it's been so frustrating. It's like the government doesn't seem interested, and the consumers aren't aware of the growing plastic problems, why other countries are moving ahead in terms of renewable energy, but we're kind of stuck behind. There's so many kind of
frustrating.
It's like it paused. Like, where did the momentum go?
I think there's two things that happened with Japan. Japan, it's not very public or flashy about what it does, but I was involved in the behind the scenes stuff, and there was a pretty full-on commitment to, getting a comprehensive climate change, policy, starting with energy policy. And there was a thing with that as well. I'm from New Zealand, anti-nuclear everything country, but at the same time, Japan recognized that, for carbon-free energy, they had to use the nuclear power plants, and that was a big anchor of the policy among all the other things that they were doing. Not ideal, but again, if you're treating it like an emergency.
If we look at the whole circle of nuclear energy, it's a problem, right? From extracting the source material, delivering the source material, using is nice and clean, but then what do you do with after? Like nuclear power and plastic has the same problem. We have no after game. We have no plan for after.
So certainly its own big set of problems. But of course, the earthquake, the 311 and the shutting down of all the nuclear power plants, unfortunately that put a big spanner in the works of all the plans of how they're going to meet the targets. The most frustrating thing, though, one that people seem to understand the least, and is the biggest problem, is the biggest blocker to renewable energy getting really big, is that the biggest blocker is, it's not willpower or building enough windmills. It's the power grid. And in Japan,
I heard you talking about the power grid, but there's a lot more localized power systems, home batteries. People have more electric cars. In Fukushima, they had solar power, and a lot of the electric cars could feed it back to the homes. There, in terms of technology, like electric cars moving ahead, it seems like there's more fixes to the grid problem. I know California also had a big grid problem.
And that's right. And this is where my own information is out of date, but this is where things got really hung up at the time that I was involved in looking at this. Um, Essentially, the fundamental problem, and lately there was a Michael Moore documentary that was very controversial because it called out these problems and it was criticized for being out of date.
Which is
And
just bad timing.
yeah,
I'm sorry, not right now when everybody's
well,
defunking climate change completely and you're going to show outdated information. It's not the time.
yeah, but at the same time, there that fundamentally what that person was saying was everyone is likes the Al Gore idea that you can make lots of money and consume a lot and still be sustainable, and that seemed to be going away from the point. And there's some legitimacy there. True green people are really obsessed with the idea of achieving a zero, you know. Zero consumption, being able to everything on a renewable basis, and he was criticizing that being lost, and I thought that was fair from the perspective of real environmental movement people that I've known in the past. But yeah, look, the thing about the reason Denmark is all on renewables and Japan can't copy them is because Denmark is connected to the European grid, so they can absorb all the intermittency of wind in Denmark because they're part of a bigger grid. Japan's the opposite. Japan has 8 separate power grids within the country. And that's just an accident of how the first power generators were brought into Japan. And it's kind of funny. It's very sexy and cool to build a highway and having a ribbon cutting ceremony. It's not very sexy to fill in the potholes. And infrastructure, everyone likes to go to a solar farm and take photos, but no one wants to go to a replacing the copper wires ceremony. And it's not as simple as that, but the investment to replace the power grid and to upgrade it and have a national power grid and to connect it ideally to Asia where you could get bigger scales of everything. It's so frustrating that there's so much wind in Hokkaido and Aomori where no people live, and there's so much solar down in Kyushu, and people in Tokyo can't access it because they're on isolated power grids.
But you can create demand for it. That's where this MyMizu Denki and Shizen Denki collaboration comes in. So I have solar on my roof. I'm making solar power and charging my electric car during the day. So I know my solar is charging my car, which is really cool. And then at night, I can't make solar, so I have to buy it from somewhere. So my local area does not have much renewable energy, if anything. So I set up my system through this Shizen Denki and creating demand. Of course, it's literally coming from my local grid. But they have to pay them to have the renewable energy. So you're funding it that way. So it seems like a good system.
Yeah, and look, Japan had great feed-in tariffs, so this is part of the thing. Particularly, and this was part of the result of the research which I did as well. The feed-in tariffs worked, and it generated every
so
empty
why
golf
did
course
they
in Japan.
stop them?
Yeah. Good
I
question.
love the feed-in tariff. That's why we invested in solar when we did, because of feed-in tariffs, right?
Every golf course in Japan got covered in solar panels, and it was great. The power companies didn't like it because of the instability it caused, which is a problem which can be fixed if you just upgrade the grid, but nobody wants to pay for upgrading the grid.
It costs. It's a big investment, but that word is
it's a necessary
investment. Because it's for the future, which we always talk about. I'd like to shift gears a little bit, if that's okay, and talk about I like your videos which focus on social equity. Yeah. Social equity is like a buzzword, right? In sustainability, community development. But I really like some of your videos, like when you went to donate your clothes and talking about the refugee crisis in Japan. And this is something that I often come back to because we're lacking enough workers in Japan. And we have people who want to come to Japan who, qualified, smart people, but the refugee situation is pretty dire in Japan. Do you want to introduce that a little bit? You learned a lot in that talk.
Well, look, and I first of all, in spite of my interest in all of this, I'm very, very much imposter complex talking about this. I am not. I have met people. I know people associated with the Japan Association for Refugees, who I've met who every day work on this stuff, and I am nothing. Handing over some large suits that they could use for court cases and so on is really a very little of a contribution. But look, absolutely, this is something where First of all, well, the refugee issue in general, people do mix it up with immigration, and it's not an immigration issue. It's a human morality issue. I am the grandchild of refugees. I wouldn't be from New Zealand if it weren't for New Zealand accepting a handful of refugees one year. And it's not a matter of giving them jobs. It's a matter of, you never know when you're going to be in the situation one day where your people are going to need a place to go to. And this is where you have an international system,
Absolutely.
which is just dependent upon, I mean, Japan, invests a lot in international institutions. And it's like so many, it's like climate change as well. So much of the debate is so off the point. It's not a matter of, whether you need them or want them or whatever. It's a matter of it simply is the right thing to do for genuine refugees. Having a system that, and half the refugees that come to Japan, they don't choose Japan. Half the time they end up here because that was the plane that they got onto was going to. But the point is, you have to take care of these people and recognize the potential. One, take it as a blessing that people want to come to your country, and look at refugees in history and the contributions that they've made to the countries that they've gone to. It's a totally different way to come into a place. So I don't know. It's just a simple doing the right thing. And it is frustrating when people say we're full, we already have enough people, or that's not the question. This is, you've got someone's house that's burning down. You're going to put them up for a little bit or help them.
And I think this is a few years ago, 2018, but at the time they said they had 5,000 applications and they accepted 11. So there's less than 1%. And I'm not sure it's changed much.
It's changed, but it hasn't changed much. And the government being very defensive about it hasn't helped. And again, at least it's not politicized, but the Ministry of Justice and the ministries that process it feed information to the media saying that, we found that, of the 5,000 applications, 4,000 of them were fake, which is just them kind of slandering the refugees themselves to defend their administrative decisions. It's shameful. I mean, that was ridiculous. And this is something as well, where as a lawyer, I've also been involved in providing support for the Japan Association of Refugees, simply out of concern of making sure it's unthinkable that 99.99% of the cases are not legitimate. And the thought that they are turning down legitimate refugees, Japan holds up cases like Shogunate, what's his name, the diplomat, the rogue diplomat that issued transit visas to Jewish people escaping Europe, but he was doing that against orders, right? He got in trouble for that. But people never appreciated the value.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that story of, because I know you're a rugby fan. Now I'm showing your rugby photos on screen. Because this reminded me of the story in Tohoku after the disaster, how the New Zealand rugby players came over and tried to help with the disaster, but also invited a lot of the Japanese from the area back to New Zealand.
I didn't realize that.
And there's a beautiful video from the World Rugby Association, maybe. I'll try to find it and put the link below. But that's the reality that we're facing in this world, in terms of we're going to have climate change refugees because of the rising waters. We're going to have more war displaced people who, they're innocent, they haven't done anything wrong, and they just cannot stay where they are. So really,
it's just it's a simple thing. I remember in my environmental law class in 1998 being shown a bit of a new age. I think it was one of those 70s videos that was sort of made, and this idea that my lecturer at the time had a theory that the internet was going to unify humanity into like a single, aware consciousness. And I'd love to meet him and ask him what he thinks about how that played out. It's kind of depressing how, in a way, I feel like we've gone the opposite way with so much information. We've kind of, I feel at times like society has become more willing to shut off recognizing humanity, and it's really important. Not like everybody, but and there's great stories like this. But absolutely, it's just common morality, and it's part of the problem of being, I think, in an isolated country like Japan tends to be. It's nowhere near as sheltered as it used to be, but people kind of use it as an excuse to switch off.
Yeah.
And all you can do is be persistent about that. And there are plenty of great Japanese people, including the people that I featured in my own video, that actually do recognize this and help these people and recognize the difference that it makes. And I wish the education system would incorporate that that kind of education a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing by highlighting that kind of story, even donating your clothes, that's a great thing for sustainability, helping people, but also helping extend products,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
which is great. But in terms of the work that you do with YouTube and doing workshops and collaborating and supporting other people, this is something that Gary Vee always says, right? Don't be competitive, right? If somebody else is doing good, you just say, oh, wow, well done. You know, you guys are awesome. And share what they're doing, comment, like it, other people's stuff, which is so hard. But this comment from Fandom about you, it says, Hikosaemon has played an important role in the community by helping many vloggers be more creative on their videos. They include introducing ways of editing, types of software, Creative Commons. And I picked up on your Creative Commons stuff, and I found some old videos where you're explaining in Japanese about using Creative Commons music and photos. And that kind of stuff is, you know, it's often, you don't see that with YouTubers quite often, like sharing information, collaborating, but you do it a lot. So well done.
Oh yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't claim to be Gandhi about any of this. Look, this was all driven
I'm
by
not saying
self.
you're Gandhi, but I'm saying you're a great
Because that would be
collaborator.
a terrible mistake. Look, I was in a funny situation actually. I was a lawyer working at a law firm when a couple of my videos went viral, and I was kind of freaking out that am I going to get in trouble for this? And it made me very mindful about, geez, I've got to find music that is copyright safe. And when I found a great solution for it, which was Creative Commons. And I realized, wow, nobody knows about this, and this is so cool. And I really want to support the people that are promoting this because this is a great thing, and this is what the internet is about. So for me, it was more, I sort of took a little bit of pride in finding it kind of first and wanting to tell everybody, hey, I found this really cool solution. I get a kick out of finding people, and look, when I meet someone who's doing something cool like the Japan Association of Refugees, on the one hand, it's an absolute worthy cause. It's also, to me, it's kind of cool. Oh, let me introduce you. Let me get you on a video. This will be great. And look, I will say that's partly I get a kick out of finding great stuff to share. And there are so many cool people in Japan doing so many cool things. I'd like to say it's all altruism, but I want to make cool. I want to find cool stuff, and that is cool. So, you know, and in the end of the day, that's what motivates me. And so if you can link it, be a little bit self-aware to make sure you're trying to do something worthwhile.
But it's the way you do it is authentic, though. It's like you really are trying to help people. You're not just doing it for the likes. I don't think, unless you're
I do like the likes.
Unless you're a good actor, are you?
I'm a terrible actor. Well, I'm good at acting, at playing a very awkward person who talks too much. Yeah, look, I mean, but this is the thing. I don't think they have to be exclusive from each other. I get a kick out of being first. I get a kick out of getting likes or doing a video that's successful, that people get it. But at the same time, it's very true with YouTube that, and I think anything in life, if you're doing it only to please other people or not based on anything that you find internally interesting, you can do that, but you won't last. You wouldn't be making videos for 13 years or 14 years like I've been doing it that way. You have to find. And I think this is part of the other thing as well. You can't force everybody in the world to be sustainable or environmentally friendly just for the sake of that per se. But if you can tie it in with cool things, and this is where I love the episode that you did with Chill and Kansai talking about Teslas, just because I haven't owned a car since I came to Japan. But I love cars.
You don't need one in Tokyo. You guys have a great. Well, maybe now with COVID, you kind of want your own space, right?
Yeah, I started running to sort of make up for that because Tokyo is so compact. But I love technology, and this is the thing as well. So this is also the part that's fighting with the wanting to be sustainable, but I also am really into futurism and future tech and so on. And I find the stuff that Musk is doing, despite my reservations about him as a human being, he's basically took all the science fiction books from my school library when I was a kid, and he's just like actually doing all of them right now. And I kind of think as well, the world is at this crossroads as well. Do we become like the Shogunate society where we all figure out how to suppress? You know, there is suppression involved, unfortunately, but have a kind of a new framework where everybody can live more sustainably and not do anything? Or do we do like Britain did and go colonize America? In this case, do we mine asteroids and put space stations in space that we don't have to mess things up down here? And a true environmentalist would say that's cheating. but I'm a tech guy as well, and I kind of think, well, that's kind of cool. And if it gets us to the same place,
Yeah. His
I'm into that too.
Elon Musk stuff on Mars. I mean, it's like he knows something that we don't know. Like he's been at the back rooms of all these government negotiations, and it makes me think it's a lot worse than we realize. Like he really has a vision
Well,
for the only way to survive is to go to Mars.
it's bad. I mean, look.
It's
So
really bad.
when I did this as a policy consulting job, I was working at Tokyo Marine, which is the largest non-life insurance company in the world. And I can tell you the insurance industry was, and I'm sure they still are, completely freaking out. Every typhoon costs more money. Now they're getting more destructive. It's the economic negative effects of climate change are absolutely measurable and growing. And it's not just governments, it's businesses, anyone who, this is so broadly affecting, and the priority to deal with it is high. And this is where it's so disheartening that things have gone off the rails the last few years, but it's just going to get worse faster, and then we're going to be in a worse and more difficult situation to get out of. I'd like to think there's something better than going to Mars that we can do about it, as much as I would love to go to Mars.
I would like to think so, because I'm never going to be able to afford that. It's only the 1% who are ever going to go to Mars, even if that's our last option.
I don't know.
But I want to give your app a little shout out here, MyChanTV, because I signed up and now I can watch the latest episodes of environmentally friendly videos, which are positive, right? So I have my subscriptions, but it's really mendokusai to go back and forth. So I really appreciate your app. Well done.
I'm currently going through the Google official app verification process right now. It's been up there for a while as sort of a small low-key app, but it recently attracted attention of Google, and I'm actually been working for the last couple of months to get all the sign-offs on it. But the idea is exactly as you say. Another thing is what I love about YouTube is what I love about it is that there is so much stuff of so much quality. I mean, I was a TV addicted child. I lived in towns where there was nothing else to do, and I just watched TV all the time. I grew up loving TV. And the decline of commercial television is like they've got this money, but everything has to be product placement, and it has to be, fixing cars, or the same themes, like how the History Channel became about car fixing. I don't understand when you can talk endlessly about great history stuff. And it seems to me that in terms of the interesting and quality content, there are people on YouTube quietly doing what TV kind of used to do for me. And there's such great stuff everywhere. Environmental videos, sustainability, for any niche you can imagine. And I love the control that you have, that you can go find these channels, subscribe to them, and have this feed. The problem is, of course, the algorithm on YouTube, the YouTube site is based upon drawing eyes towards certain content, that they want you to go towards and detect. If you watch one video like that, it'll flood your feed with that and not show you the subscriptions, which are what you really want to watch. So the idea of MyChanTV is just to give you a way to control the algorithm yourself and actually set it up in a way that you don't have to go hunting for the videos that you want to see.
I think it's brilliant. And like I was talking to this with a few people on YouTube who've been on the series, like Paul Martin, who's a samurai sword expert. And he has very high quality, beautiful videos. He is so knowledgeable, and he is so frustrated by the algorithm because his videos are ranked way down compared to people who are just playing with toy swords or something, And I find that I'm doing videos every day, every weekday. You're number 89, but it's really hard for people to find my videos, I've heard. So
well, one thing about YouTubing is it is a marathon, not a sprint. And you certainly, if you consistently put it out, going up there and expecting the instant gratification, 90% of people who try YouTube get discouraged within about 3 months. And understandably give up when every video only has 10 views. But I think if you put really good content up there and people recognize it as good content and you stick at it, I remember when I knew that I had 10 views on every video, and I knew the handle names of every single person who watched and commented, and I was cool with that because I was making the content I wanted to make, and that's how it snowballed over a long period of time into what I've got now. So hope you've enjoyed your 89 episodes, because
Absolutely. No,
then you can
it's
keep doing it.
amazing. It's amazing that anybody is watching, because it's all for my benefit alone. And I really appreciate everybody keeps saying yes, and I'm learning so much. So
Well,
that's another Gary Vee thing,
well,
right? It's what
the,
is behind your reason to make content. Like you
well,
is it to give value to people? And if so, then it's gonna be able to, continue.
well, I'll answer that. But first thing is, the video you did with Matt Elt the other day, the video you did with Brian Ashcraft the other day. I watch documentary content on YouTube almost nonstop, and I used to watch the Discovery Channel and the History Channel. I haven't seen any documentary or interview that comes even close to those two videos that you did recently, just in terms
Thank
of like
you.
interesting stuff. I
Awesome.
completely feel unworthy to be following
Aw.
such great
Well,
videos.
I love it because to me it combines my researching passion together, which I did university work for years, and it has that passion together with kind of journalism, together with being a talk show host,
Yeah,
and it's all wrapped into one. It's a lot of work to research before everybody, but I'm enjoying it. It's great
yeah.
fun.
Eh, And so, in my case, as much as I'd love to say I'm doing this to make the world a better place, uh, no, embarrassingly, again, being self-honest, I'd probably, and I joke, but I did do this when there are only 10 people watching. And that's important. I'm doing it because it's what interests me. I love analyzing. I love looking at the news and talking about it, and pointing out what I found interesting and why I found it interesting, and giving all the background from all the other news I've watched leading up to this. And I'm so gratified that some people I think watch in order to help them get to sleep. But for other people, they show up and they offer. I've got a great community around who watches that give good sort of comments. That's always fun, that part of it. And yeah, they just let me do what honestly I'd be doing if that's a test. I'd be doing this even if no one was watching, probably, which is a bit embarrassing. But it makes me feel more sane having other people around. And yeah, it is just purely what interests me. I mean, it's and I'm not trying for any higher, not always for high purpose, but I guess when you start doing it and when you recognize not only is this interesting, but it's also worthwhile, you get an extra kick from that. And of course, you're motivated to do that. But sure, I'll just as much talk for 30 minutes about the Osaka Expo logo and isn't it funny? And that's all good. That's what makes it interesting to me and the people who watch.
But what you're doing with the Tokyo Tonight
Yeah,
is a wrap up of news,
yeah,
and at the same time, you're giving people advice who have just moved to Japan, who are struggling, and
oh yeah,
or interested in Japan, and that is such a service. Like no, seriously,
well,
that I
that,
and
that,
then I heard some really good advice. You were talking to a guy who said he was depressed,
mm,
and you said you took up kickboxing, and to be physically
wow,
tired really
mm,
helped you, right?
yeah,
And I
well,
mean,
that's
those
incredible.
little tidbits like stick in my head, like I'm sure many of the people who listen.
I went through a bit of a journey on this. So, look, my first 7 years in Japan, my big plan for coming to Japan was to become the most Japanese gaijin ever. That was sort of, and I was one of those people. You see them less now because now there are so many more foreigners in Japan, but it was really my thing where even if I saw another foreigner, I would be like, I don't want to be anywhere near you. Which I cringe thinking about the way that I was, but I did that partly because I was so invested in trying to get good at what I was trying to build up those sort of skills. And I reached a point where when I started working for a foreign law firm, and I'd sort of built up all of this knowledge, which I realized was helpful for other people. I'd been through all these sort of things. And I also realized, particularly when I started playing rugby for a French rugby team, um, I've been avoiding foreigners for so long. And now, one, I sort of was reflecting that, okay, I got into this position that I'm in by being a kind of person that I found to be embarrassing myself. But now that all that investment is paid off, yeah, you know what? Why should they have to suffer because I suffered? Why not help them? Like, what's wrong with that? And I actually early on before Tokyo Tonight, I made a bunch of videos on how to deal with the stress of being forced to work long hours in Japanese companies and why people are thinking certain ways and how to cope and strategy. And it's what I talk a lot about with Rochelle Kopp in that series as well, dealing with working in Japan and stuff like that. And yeah, and now of course I was in my 20s when I started doing that, and now I'm 44. So now I guess I can combine with that. giving people advice on depression, I'm thinking, oh my God, did I give someone advice on depression? That's like the worst thing ever. But
Well, no,
absolutely,
I mean
exercise helps. I mean, that's
the
just advice I'm happy to give.
it's just someone who mentioned I'm feeling
Yeah,
depressed and I can't eat or something, and it was your honest and real reaction.
yeah,
And having people who have been in Japan for so long like you, and
mm,
people who are interested in Japan or already living in Japan but kind of struggling,
yeah,
there just isn't. And I think live stream is so perfect for that,
mm,
because you are reacting to people's comments and questions in a very real way, in real time. And
yeah,
I think it's 10 years ago, your Japan Times article, you were saying you did a video for them and you said live
yeah.
stream is the future. And I was like, wow, cool.
Did I say that?
You did 10 years ago.
Wow.
And now you're doing loads of live stream, but you weren't in the beginning, right?
I was editing videos originally.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think part of it was becoming having a son 10 years ago and needing to figure out. It is funny. That's the old joke that I'd make shorter videos if I had more time. It's easy to just turn on and record and stop recording. Live streaming is easier and it lets me do what I want to do. Of course, I was really focused before that on making really well edited videos.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is easy to do and you can actually achieve a pretty good production quality and value as you are doing.
Thank
Before we
you.
started, I took the opportunity talking to JJ Walsh. Within 10 seconds, I started asking her for technical tips on how did you do that. So you take every opportunity.
Well, I've learned so much along the way. It's,
Yeah,
it has been a trial and error journey. But I think in terms of trying to do something focused on sustainability, I
mm,
find live streaming is the most authentic way to do it because
yeah,
you're accountable to people. You're not hiding anything. I'm not editing anything out.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. The other thing about it is what's really hard with Twitter, and I love sharing what I find interesting, and I love some of the discussions that you have from it. But every comment when you're restricted to 140 characters, um, particularly when you post about the sort of things I post about everything, but I post a lot of politics, which not everyone is interested in, but people say, you forgot to mention this, and this is a problem. You can't do any nuance on Twitter at all. Live streaming is nothing but, that's what I do. I do nuance. When I show a news story, you can read the news story. It's got 5 lines that'll grab your most attention, but let me tell you about why this is really cool and how this connects to other things. That's what I love about live streaming. As social media, as data goes, it's a lot of noise. It's really hard to extract why this is good and get the algorithms to pick it up. And I'm hoping that the technology around that will improve. And I'm hoping that this investment of all these live streams will actually, people will actually find good content out of it and better in future. But yeah, you can actually, I think the reason it's more genuine is that you can have people come in and not just express stupid, straight, simplistic ideas. You can actually go in and say, this is really worthwhile, but these are all the debates, and that's far more interesting to me. And that's what there's so much of on YouTube that you don't see on commercial TV anymore, which is why I love YouTube as a medium, and it's why I made my ChanTV.
yeah. And now with MyChanTV and things like that, you
Yeah,
can watch YouTube kind of the way you want to. Whereas now when we watch TV, we're kind of watching it the way we want to
mm,
without commercials and when we like.
yeah,
So it's changing mediums, isn't it? The future of media.
yeah. As a TV addicted kid, the idea that I'd be giving up on TV, I watch NHK News. I actually. Again, having a kid helps you appreciate NHK a lot. There is actually great, fantastic content on there, but the Minpo, the commercial TV, just the same talento over and over and over. I mean, it's not bad, but I can't really do it anymore. And there is just so much interesting stuff every day coming up out of the feeds, including your videos.
Oh,
That
thank you.
that and
Very
look,
kind.
yeah, and
I
sharing you, like from my perspective, that's a win-win. If I get credit for introducing you to somebody, I'm like, of course, give me all the credit. So it's fun.
So I want to ask you a question about this Rubik's Cube code that you wrote out for your kid. I am so amazed and impressed
Oh,
by it.
yes.
But you surprised me in all the research for this. Going through your photos and stuff, I learned so much about you and listening to your live stream talks, of course. But you're, a complex person, and I hope people realize that who are your fans. And
I'm
aren't
really
we
not.
all? Aren't we all? No, seriously,
Yeah.
you can't judge a book by its cover, and
No.
yeah.
Well, I must admit, I remember there's a YouTuber who I respect very much. He's very creative, makes interesting stuff, but he's kind of a too cool for school a little bit himself as well. And I remember watching a show where he talked about me. I think he actually said it to me, or he talked about me sometime when he said I'm a little bit too white bread, and I knew what he meant by it. And I was kind of like, I love to exceed lowered expectations. That's a nice that's a nice way to succeed. Um,
Well, I don't know if I've touched on everything I wanted to, but I
wow, you
I
touched on a
I
lot.
did want to, it's an hour already. So I
Yeah.
did want to say that I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. I know it's for yourself as well, but
Yeah.
I know that it takes effort to be as collaborative and as helpful as you are being. And thank you for doing that. And please keep up the good work.
Thank you for making this awesome stuff, which one, I love watching, and two, I love sharing. And yeah, I think you've got to take some self-satisfaction. It's okay to feel self-satisfaction, but if you get the added bonus that it's doing something for other people as well, all the better, right? So yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for your comments. There were no questions, but lots of comments from Denise, Benba, Melanie Brock, Mary, Louise Puppy, Mr. Cordy Sepp,
Mr. Cordy, yes.
Andrew, and Little Foreigner, and Melanie. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank
Take
you.
care. Join
See ya.
us again tomorrow. Bye.